Everyone signed up for public participation, so it takes us to our action agenda. And item number 12 is action is necessary. And the only item from executive session is selected employment items shown in Exhibit A. Do I have a motion? Mr. Cates.
Mr. Chairman, I move we give approval to the selected employment items, Exhibit A.
Have a second. Ms. Hammond seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously. That brings us to item number 13, which is our discussion agenda, professional services provided by Malone and McBroom. I think we have a presentation. Dr. Government, who's going to introduce?
Yes, sir. Dr. Harris is going to introduce this agenda item this evening. So Dr. Harris, if you'll make her introduction.
Thank you so much. There we go. Thank you so much, and good evening to the community. I'm so pleased to introduce Mike Zuba, who is our Director of Planning for Maloney McBroom's Public, Private, and Educational Planning Development Projects. Mr. Zuba and I have had opportunity to talk frequently over the phone and by email over the past several months, and I'd like to share he's got a wealth of experience in being directly involved with community planning assignments, including the preparation of community comprehensive plans, housing studies, residential and commercial market studies, projects requiring revitalization, redevelopment, and reuse planning. And he has worked extensively with a number of districts and a number of different cities, and most notably to us, has worked with our neighboring school, Lexington School District 1, where he served as project manager for enrollment analysis and projections, demographic and housing development analysis, and analysis for future school facility needs. With great pleasure, we introduce Mike Zuba, Director of Planning for Malone McBroom.
As Dr. Harris mentioned, I'm pleased to be here. I want to have a brief presentation just to tell you a little bit more about who we are, what we do, why we're here, as well as talk through our process. Malone McBroom has been in business since 1984. You may not know, for 15 years we had a presence in South Carolina. We had an office in Greenville up until about 5 years ago. I personally worked through that Greenville office on select assignments, none down in the Columbia area. Most of our work was around Greenville, Spartanburg, as well as Pickens, South Carolina. Through that time, I developed an understanding for housing development, land use, zoning, as well as demographic work throughout the state. Most recently, about 2 years ago, we were re-engaged by Lexington School District 1, going through a lot of growth there, being able to provide technical assistance there, and going through and analyzing what's happening housing-wise and how better to position the district as they were contemplating a major referendum. I put together just a little package that goes through that project. So as I walk you through some of our examples, they may look a little Lexington specific. However, we have done this project throughout many communities. We go through our MMI by the numbers. Our K-12 school expertise is really revolving around demographics. I'm a certified city planner with a specialty in demographics and land use. I love going through and figuring out problems, whether that's enrollment projections, identifying where housing growth is occurring and what that means from a community, from a traffic, a zoning, or even getting into a school districting standpoint. It's a big part of what we do. It's a big part of what drives us. I'll touch on my team in a little bit. It's not just me, but I'm supported by a full planning team. As we get into sort of our qualifications by the numbers, we do anywhere between 12 and 16, 18, averaging about 15 enrollment demographics and really growth studies, which would be the first part of what we're proposing here every year. In the last 5 years, we've done over 20 school redistricting plans. Some of those have been as large as 2,500 students moved in one given spring for the following school year. Others have been much more targeted and looking at building construction, as schools coming online. Obviously, you have to look at the attendance zones and when you're going to populate that school, especially if it's not replacing an existing school. And some have involved going through school consolidation plans. In some areas of the Northeast, they haven't rebounded yet from the Great Recession, and those communities are still shrinking and looking at contraction. We have completed about 24 long-range plans. A lot of those look at not only the needs of the district, understanding your educational needs, understanding your facilities needs, but also involve a lot of public outreach where we're talking with the administrators, working with the different leadership at the buildings, identifying vision, values, programs that you want to be able to have moving forward, then matching that with all the key parts like enrollment, sites, facilities, grade configurations, and how that project could get packaged to be able to move forward into a successful construction project. About 3/4 of our clients are repeat clients. We have a very strong client base. I'd like to think that the other 25%, we've done such a good job, they just haven't called us back yet, but when that need arises, we'll be sure to hear from them. So really supported by me is my planning team, as I'm showing on this slide. Both Rebecca and I would be your project leadership. We are both owners in my Malone McBroom. We have been owners for over 10 years each. We are an employee-owned company. We are also backed by experts in geographic information systems, which really, Megan, that's what drives our redistricting analysis, drives a lot of the technical parts of our options, and then our certified planners that have expertise in being able to understand the growth factors, those equations, plugging all that information in to ensure that we're sort of looking at everything across your entire community as that we lay out this plan, lay out this program, we leave no stone unturned as part of that approach. So they will be supporting me along this effort. Getting into our project understanding, it really comes down to the simplest of things, and that when we come in, it's really trying to align your facilities with your capacity as well as with your facility needs to some degree and your current and future enrollment. I've been well apprised of what's going on here with the enrollment freezes as well as the planned school construction. I did a little digging around, and similar to Lexington School District 1, I saw where you had MBCon go through and do a facility needs assessment. We've learned through that work in School District 1 that there's a lot of great valuable information in on there that allows us to better hit the ground running and be able to move that forward. We're also very familiar with the Lexington County, the comprehensive plan, their planning staff there. We will look forward to reaching out to Richland County as well to be able to establish that working relationship with them. A lot of the stuff that's going to come from the housing development and demographics is going to build upon a lot of the work that they've been doing as we did with District 1. We see this process as really getting a good knowledge base of where you're at. It's sort of like that going for a doctor's visit, doing that checkup, understanding where your standing is from so many different aspects, not only of your current growth, but your future growth, and then looking at really the capacity of all your buildings before we even get into sort of laying out some of those redistricting alternatives. As with any school redistricting, it really is a community-led process. I've been doing this for 18 years, doing school redistricting, and we've learned a lot about the community dialogue, how to be able to engage the community. Tools have greatly changed since we originally started engaging communities back, almost 2 decades ago. Now there's different platforms, different media needs. We leverage all those. We understand parents are busy and it's hard to get out to a workshop. So as you'll see a little later on, we're providing that through online media, being able to connect with the community through that. And then really working closely with all the administration, understanding all of the moving parts, the inner working with the district, engaging with the Board of Trustees, and then engaging with the community themselves to ensure that the alternatives that we put forward really align to be able to meet all of your objectives and your vision for the future of the schools. Part of our philosophy that really permeates every one of our studies is, regardless of your size or location, we believe in developing those sound, future-oriented projections and creating a redistricting plan that's sustaining. We don't ever want to just be looking ahead 1 year. We want to be looking ahead 5 years and 10 years. We know that it's a very difficult conversation for every community to have, to be able to even mention that R word, that reconfigure, redistricting word. I know how it was for me personally. Just last year, our community was building some new schools, and we went through the whole redistricting process. So my 2 kids in the elementary school were part of that redistricting and were unfortunately moved from our neighborhood school. I was not the consultant on that project. It was probably a very wise choice in town because we do love where we live. But just being able to see how it touched that home, it really touched my wife, and being able to go to those meetings and have those conversations, you learn a lot of things being on the other side of the equation and seeing that you know, it really is the message at home. It's the message that, you know, we bring to our children as we're going through a process like that. And that if we're positive as parents, the administrators are positive, the building leadership's positive, the kids are gonna be positive because they are probably some of the most resilient ones out of all of us. We believe in providing the technical data. We're the ones to do the deep dive on all the analysis, all of the geographic information systems, the mapping, the housing, the different mathematical formulas that we're gonna build into this process and that we always build in every process. You know, that's where our team and our skill set really provides the sound information so that you as decision makers know that you're being well informed by the best information out there. Being able to present all of that complex technical information to the community in a very easily digestible and understood manner. We don't believe in providing a report that's, you know, a half inch, an inch thick and say, boy, this is how we got there. We know that parents out there are extremely busy. I know as a parent, I'm extremely busy running around from everything. I need to be able to digest things in quick sound bites, understand what the charge is, what the mission is, what the criteria, and how we're getting there to say, okay, I believe and I have faith in this process and this decision. So we're really good at being able to take all of that complex information, break it down, and then present it back out for the community and the decision makers. And most of all, it's really a process between the consultant team, the district, and the community. We're looking for local information. We wouldn't be able to do our work unless we were getting that feedback, getting that local knowledge, getting the institutional knowledge from the district, as well as us providing that technical knowledge and that experience of having done this many times before. It really takes all three of those components working in sync on a project like this. So really, as part of our project approach, we really look at two scales. We want to understand at the district level what is happening within your community. We want to look at it from the student generation standpoint. We want to understand where you're growing, how fast you're growing, and what your trajectory is going to be moving forward. We look at the historic development patterns, but mostly we really look at your current trends, those housing sales, those housing starts, putting push pins on our digital map of where are the houses selling fastest, where are new students coming in, and then where is the future housing going to occur, and how quickly is it going to occur. We've provided just a little snapshot from District 1 on the right-hand side of looking at the two big factors there and looking at it at the elementary school level of where was new housing coming in and how many students are generated from each new housing unit that comes online. And then also looking at the turnover of existing units, mining and analyzing that housing sales data to see that it's a two-part equation, that if we only looked at where we're seeing construction signs pop up, we're missing out on the fact that maybe some older individuals are moving out of your community, turning that home over to a young family, and they're coming in with how many children. So we really want to be able to understand that from the district standpoint and then really driving down to the individual school standpoint. The map on the upper right of our screen really shows hotspots of looking at District 1's different catchment zones. This was all based on county level data that we analyzed, scrubbed, and mined down to be able to get where that future housing is going to occur in the next 5 years. Some of these were approved lots that weren't under construction yet, some were under construction, and some of them were what we'll call pipeline projects. So as they were looking at their redistricting, looking at their referendum, and looking at their growth plan, they wanted to know from us, where are we gonna see these greatest pressures and how do we position our school facilities to be able to be proactive rather than reactive to address this. So we're going through that information, looking at it, and being able to analyze it, and then build that into what our enrollment projections are. Here's just a little snapshot of looking at a 5-year and 10-year growth horizon across the different attendance zones in District 1, looking at where the greatest growth is occurring. That all gets capped by our district-wide projections. So as we start looking at the neighborhood level, we're also looking at the district level. We always get the greatest accuracy of our data at the district level, and we always look at 3 different economic conditions. Those that have been in this business long enough know that when something like a Great Recession hits, that nobody projects that. We want to develop high, medium, and low projections so that they account for those large unknowns in regional, state, as well as national and international economic factors, so that when we're developing our plans around them, we sort of have all of our bases covered. With District 1, we looked at those different factors, we generated 3 projections, and then provided our expert opinion on which one would be the best fit. We recently got input back from them going across the board on many of the individual schools we projected, and we were within a handful of students 2 years out based on those projections for school redistricting. We strive as a company for each of our districts that we have sub 1% accuracy. So as we look back, we were within 1% of our projected enrollment each given year, really with our sweet spot around 0.5% for each given school system, looking out ahead for that first 5 years. The next 5 years is a little dicier in that we don't know births, so we have to make some estimates on births. There we waver a little bit above 1%, but a lot of our facility planning work and a lot of our school construction work and our redistricting work, our recommendations are typically implemented within that 5-year window in which we have the greatest accuracy for our enrollment projections. As we get into the enrollment projections, they really sort of come to bear as we look at your space needs. So using your already assigned and prescribed capacity numbers for your schools, we're gonna plug in our enrollment projections there and take a look at what your space needs are, not only next year, but a number of years out. And this will account for sort of the change in paradigm over the last few years where you've had the enrollment freeze. We're likely gonna see some different trends than you had, say, 5 or 8 years ago before you had that enrollment freeze. We're gonna look at what your enrollment's gonna look like going forward, and then we're gonna wanna take the same approach and take a look at what it's gonna look like when that enrollment freeze stops and you have a school that's likely going to be or is gonna be under construction over the next couple of years, comes online, and what that would look like for the remainder of the schools within your system. We're able to project that out going forward and be able to have that as a key planning point, and that data is gonna be presented back to you in the community so you can see exactly where we're at on our footing as we begin getting into these different redistricting alternatives. As part of the redistricting, it's important to always consider, well, what's our roadmap? What is our goal? What is our charge as a board? What is our charge as a community? What are we trying to accomplish? So each of our clients we work through and we have them establish the guiding criteria. Each one sets forth their key parameters, their must-haves, their I would like to accomplish, and we work with them to be able to generate those. And those provide really the guidance for us as the consultant as we go through this process and start developing these different alternatives. Well, what is something that we can't do? What is something that we should do? And what is most important to you that you want to accomplish? And once we are really intimately familiar with that, we're able then to be able to go through this process of creating options that we know from the get-go, they're really starting to check your boxes, and then you're really weighing in on these various options that, you know, for starters, check your boxes, but what gets you the closest to what you really want to have? The bottom right just shows a little example from District 1 as we were looking to be able to site and create the districts around the new middle school there that's under construction. Going through there, and you can see the little push pins, the little blue, purple, and green dots. Each of those represent a middle school student. So that level of specificity of data where we have really 5 years of student data mapped out on your community map. We could then draw some circles around those areas, look at what the historic enrollment looks like in those areas, and then project forward. If we make these changes, how many students are we gonna have in year 1? Well, how many are we gonna have in year 2, year 3, to be able to see which of these really works best? Sometimes you go through these options and you present an option that looks tremendous in year 1, but we often find that there's things like housing developments that are coming online, a whole bunch of students that are in some lower grades there that we may not see at first pass, and we find out that that option isn't great in year 2, 3, and 4. That's why we really look at this as an iterative process to be able to evaluate it, not only based on the first year, but really looking forward to the last year of the horizon, to be able to really build those recommendations. As we go through this process, we also provide a lot of great information back. Some of that looks at the impact of the students in the community, how many students are impacted, is there a way to be able to grandfather or not grandfather, what does it do for your overall facility utilization and programming? So it may make it so that you're hitting the sweet spot and reducing your overcrowding in 1 or 2 schools, but what does it do to the other schools? Are they now under-enrolled? Is there other considerations there that you really didn't think about until you begin seeing those options? And then that's really when it starts sparking that deeper conversation. The example on the right is where we've worked with the community and we really wanted to be able to ensure that we were attaining class sizes. the impetus for that redistricting was all about having equity in the community. We had some schools that were way overcrowded. We had some schools that were very under-enrolled. And what was driving that was an inequity in class sizes and equity in resources. So through our process, we recommended creating a standard deployment model across all of the elementary schools. We then projected forward, looking at each grade cohort, looking at kindergarten, are we hitting our class size guidelines? And then looking at our class size guidelines for the elementary schools and saying, do we have parity across the board here, year 1, year 2, year 3? And that was really the main criteria that their board charged us with to ensure that we were evenly distributing the students, and it was going to be lasting going forward. Last but not least, and it should never be last, but it is in this slide deck, it's our public outreach approach. It really starts at day one of being able to get that information out there, informing the community, creating a online presence of sorts of this is happening, here's when we're looking at potentially having meetings, providing an avenue through our ArcGIS online platform where parents may not be able to come out to a workshop, see the traditional paper maps up on the wall, provide comments, they could log in, do so online, look at what we're proposing, give us some feedback on it. Still holding the traditional town hall workshops where our planners and we are, 2 of us are National Charrette Institute certified, so we go through ongoing training and public outreach, conducting workshops, consensus building, engaging, designing those workshops in a way to get really good input and feedback in a positive manner. And then really taking that input and looking at what we're presenting and what we're proposing and seeing if there's a way that we could be able to make this option better so it does meet the larger community need. We always realize, and having done this enough, that you always have different groups of the parent community that they're just not happy with redistricting or they're not happy with it, but we want to hear from them because a lot of times deep down inside, some of them do have some valuable information that we do want to consider, and that's really part of our process is being able to listen, being able to learn more about what's driving some of the decisions in the community and what's driving some of the parent choice in the community, and seeing if we can incorporate that in our final plan, and taking all of that input and then rolling it into a final set of recommendations for the Board of Trustees to consider. As part of this project, we're looking at about a 6-month project schedule. That would probably be around the minimum for it. It could take longer. We like to be able to work our public workshops and our public engagement in at key times. We also do have to do a fair bit of data collection early on, which we're going to rely on the county planning departments for that, so to be able to keep moving them along. But really looking at months 1 through 3 of sort of going through that checkup and seeing what the growth forecasting is, what the enrollment projections are, setting the stage of what your future enrollment at each neighborhood is going to look like going forward, and then really being able to have that baseline of data before we ever put pen to the pad and start looking at the different redistricting scenarios and options. We would look to the Board of Trustees as well as the administration to provide us with our guiding criteria, providing us with a specific charge of really where they want to be at the end of this process. And then it's really up to the collaborative effort amongst the 3 entities I discussed, MMI, the district, and really the community to create and craft those options that we could present forward and really find one that's going to lead to that option for the recommendation. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the board for any questions.
Mr. Zuber, you need a drink of water? You did a great presentation.
I was told I have to stick at the 15 minutes you guys had up.
No, you did. It's
So I've been practicing not breathing, so.
quite comprehensive, and I appreciate it. You're welcome to have a drink of water. And I know we're going to have some questions from the board, so that's great. Ms. Hammond and Mr. Lovelace.
Thank you. It was a good presentation, and you did it quickly. And it's a lot of information. One thing I wanted to ask, and I don't even know if you've encountered this, but it sounds like you've been in business long enough. When you mentioned about how sometimes there are trends that are happening that maybe weren't happening the last time you did one of these, how do you figure in any trends with virtual schools that are going on, or state charter schools, which we certainly have had our, and we can have our opinions on those, but they are a factor that we have to deal with. So I'd like to see how you calculate that as you look at all this other information.
Yeah, that's information we're gonna wanna learn more about. We've dealt with a lot of charter schools, we've worked in a lot of communities that were once neighborhood-based and have gone completely to open choice and charter. So we're very well aware of the different forms of education out there. We've worked in communities that have very large homeschooling and virtual populations as well. So what we want to do is we want to be able to take a look at, in your community, where are the charters at? Are they on the rise? What does the likely horizon look like? And then be able to balance that in as we're getting into that entire baseline growth of all the other demographics.
And is this, is this project, it entails our entire district, it's not one area, it's the whole District 5?
It's all
the
District-
schools?
all
right.
District 5.
And I do understand that we pay for, I guess we're paying for you, we give you really the data, you get data from the counties, because I know, and I've talked to different developers in the area, some of our large ones, that they have lots of information that they also would provide the school. So your contract really just sort of takes all of this and puts it together.
We analyze it, and we
You're
also
analyzing what we actually gather and give to you.
And we're gonna collect a lot of the county data.
Mhm.
We'll reach out to, and we've had focus group meetings with Board of Realtors, interviews with the real estate community to understand what some of those trends are, as well as using census data. Unfortunately, the US Census is really old at this time. It was fielded in 2010, won't be fielded until 2020, and then put back out a few months later. So we are working with some estimates and not great data there. However, a lot of the data exists out there that we need. Somebody just needs to be able to pull it all together and know how to analyze it and know how to analyze it properly to be able to get some valuable information out of it that you could use as a planning tool.
Mr. Lovelace.
Mr. Zuba, as I understood it, the district would give you constraints, and then you would make recommendations from those constraints. But
Criteria, yeah.
Yeah, I also understood that you don't do transportation studies?
We do not do bus routing, transportation costs, or bus timing studies. What we do is we'll produce our analysis, our maps, and then rely on working with your
Mr. Wise?
with your transportation administration. We found that to be very successful. In some communities that are very, very complex, in some of our more urban districts, we have subcontracted with third-party transportation companies just because it's so complex. But that's not our bailiwick. We're not bus routing individuals. We're city planners, we're demographers that do school redistricting and do growth.
Okay, so if we have a constraint, one of the constraints would be the length of a bus trip or the amount of gasoline we want to use, or how much time that would be involved in getting a student from one place to the other, then how do we get that, incorporated into your study?
I would have to have some dialogue and figure out the type of software you're using and how I could provide my data back in a format to run it through your routing system, or if you have a third party already on board that does your transportation routing annually, we would work with them.
Okay, and as far as you mentioned census data, wouldn't it make a whole lot more sense to get that census data for the 2020 before we dive into some study here?
It really won't be available in full form until 2021, and I believe your timeline for opening new school is 2021.
And you're talking about projecting from a 2010 study?
We project from your school enrollment. The census data just gives us some broad trends in things like median age of your district, householder size. It doesn't get the specific information that we're going to get from your district, where we use the cohort survival. We were able to get through the county vital statistics, the birth records, so we know the number of births. We're able to analyze how many births turn into kindergartners. So really the census data provides us with some information, but not a tremendous amount of information.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one more, if nobody else has one. Your company, where are you located? Are y'all in, did I hear that, Connecticut?
Our corporate office is in Connecticut. We have offices in every state in the Northeast.
And so that's what I was getting at. If you would do this project for us, who would be the go-to person for us, right here in our community that would know our community best?
We would be the ones that would learn your community and be presenting to your community.
So it'd actually be somebody from your office that's in South Carolina, I guess I'm saying.
We no longer have an office in South Carolina. We closed it about 4 years ago.
Greenville, that's right, you said.
Greenville.
I'm sorry.
So we would be traveling down here to be
Okay,
the
so
key
the
people.
person that's the really go-to for us would not be from here.
No, they would not be from here.
To piggyback on that, I would anticipate you all have been working in Lexington One. You would plan to be on the ground a certain amount of time. Of course, we're in a
Yeah.
technology world right now, but I know that Dr. Harris and Mr. Holden, you probably already met both of them as far as this whole process, but I would anticipate that a lot of your time initially would be with them and then branching out from there. There are a lot of moving parts to all of this. And I'm glad that Mr. Lovelace asked that question. I know with a 10-year cycle on census, the further toward the end, the less reliable the data, but what I heard you say is one of many tools.
It is.
You all probably trend that up somewhat, but it's a study. You're gonna come and study the area, study all the moving parts, and then try to make a recommendation to the best of your ability.
Yeah, so what we typically do, and I talked with Dr. Harris on it, is we sort of have our immersion days where we would come down to your community, we would meet with all the key administration. We would also then meet with all the key people outside of your administration to be able to collect information, ask questions, what do we need to know? And then we're very good at being able to have sort of virtual meetings, sharing of information via electronically, to be able to talk through a lot of those questions. But really, we found it very important in all of our studies is to be able to get on the ground, meet with the different planning folks. They like to be able to talk about what they're doing personally. We like to be able to have that personal connection before we ask them to give us a whole bunch of stuff. And then we promise what we do is we give them back a whole bunch of stuff that's better. So part of what we do is we build their base of information as well that they could use for some of their other areas. So it really is a nice partnership no matter where we're at. If it's South Carolina, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, when we're working in communities, that we take a lot of their data, we analyze it, and we give them a lot of useful stuff back that they can use elsewhere.
A lot of shared data. I'm encouraged the fact that you all are in the middle of or just recently done this study in Lexington One. And I know you mentioned Richland County. That's where you probably have to establish your new relationships because you already have relationships in Lexington and many little towns that might be affected and have data. So
Yeah.
it's good. Sounds like a great process. Any other questions from the board? Ms. Hammond?
Mr. Gann, do we know the total cost? Do we already know that?
May I raise a point of order on that? Mr. Gann, that is, the contract was presented in executive session and would not be appropriate to discuss it at this
Until
point
we-
because we have not executed a contract.
And we've not,
So we might
we're
like
not,
look at somebody
that's
else.
not what we're doing. We're just having a discussion on tonight. But that will be fully known. Any other points, questions? Mr. Zuma, we appreciate you being here, presenting for us. And I'm sure that you and Dr. Harris will be in touch. And then I know we have this scheduled for a later date to take it up in a board meeting publicly, so.
You're welcome. And if any other questions pop up in the interim, be sure to run through Dr. Harris. I'd be happy to answer them.
That's a great suggestion. Anybody that has anything that you think about that you maybe didn't ask tonight, let's get them to Dr. Harris and he can get an answer, and that would
Yeah.
be well in advance of any action taken on this.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy your evening.
Appreciate your presentation. That brings us to item number 14, which is discussion and first reading of proposed revisions to the G board policies, which are shown in Exhibit B. Do I have a motion? Mr. McKibbs.
Mr. Chairman, I move we give discussion and first reading of proposed revision to G Board Policies Exhibit B, which include GPA, open hiring, equal employment opportunity, and affirmative action, GCE, professional staff recruitment, GCEC, posting and advertising of professional vacancy, GCF, professional staff hiring, and GDF, support staff hiring.
We have a motion, Ms. Hammond seconds. Any Before we have further discussion, probably need to turn it to Dr. Jakes, who's going to lead the discussion. Did you have?
I did want to say that, Dr. Jakes, I appreciate getting those to us well ahead of time, and having read through them, it appears that most of the changes that you have brought to us really are a result of change in either state law or federal law, and that we are kind of making sure our policies are aligned with those authorities. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Jason, you going to highlight any of these, or?
So basically, we have, this group of 5 policies, and just as Mr. Cates stated, we're updating these to bring these into compliance with the law. And, of the most specificity is our state statute, which now specifically addresses pregnancy. And so that is a thread that you'll see throughout the 5. And also, just in keeping with the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is charged with enforcing federal laws that prohibit employment discrimination, simply bringing these up to compliance with law.
Okay, does anyone have anything specific to this? And I think it's key that we're constantly updating policies because of changes in the law and so forth. So appreciate you being able to do that in such a great fashion. Seeing no questions, if it's the will of the board, I would suggest that we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes unanimously, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to item number 15, which is discussion and first reading of proposed revisions to board policy JFBA, intra-district transfer and withdrawal, shown in Exhibit C. Do I have a motion? Mr. Cates.
Mr. Chairman, I move we give approval, discussion and first reading, approval of proposed revisions to board policy JFBA, intra-district transfer and withdrawal, as presented in Exhibit C.
We have a second. Ms. Hammond seconds. And our discussion, everybody's going to lead us on this discussion, please. Dr. Jakes. Dr. Harris.
Absolutely, thank you.
You want me to give that to Dr. Jakes?
She's certainly more than capable, no doubt. Thank you, Mr. Gant and members of the board. This policy heretofore has had 2 tracks. One regard to school of choice and then other related to magnet. And short and simply stated, the school of choice option was an annual application process, whereas the magnet school option was once a person has been approved, they were there and enrolled in that particular school through the highest grade level. What these suggestions or revisions suggest or advise us is that we would like to recommend to the board that we consider having 1 track, and that during the application period, late January, early February, when the application process opens for school of choice and magnet schools, that once students are approved, that they remain in that particular school through the highest grade level. And that way we would do that for both programs, school of choice as well as magnet schools.
Any questions? Mr. Cates.
Dr. Harris, I think what you're bringing forward would alleviate some of that confusion of, well, do I fill out, do I have to go into the lottery, the enrollment for a magnet school, or, for example, at Spring Hill, once they're there, they're there until they graduate or decide to leave, and there was always some confusion. Well, I got in my freshman year, do I have to reapply my sophomore year? And so it looks like this would clean that up and treat all of those inter-district transfers the same. Is that what I'm reading from the changes?
That is exactly and precisely what we would like to do and recommending tonight, that it does clean that up, and I think it makes it cleaner, simpler for parents and community to understand, and certainly makes our process a little more palatable than what it has been.
Thank you.
Any other questions, discussion?
Yeah.
Mr. Lovelace.
So if you had a vacancy, let's say in a magnet school in high school, let's say somebody left and transferred out of state, and you had a sophomore vacancy, can that be filled with somebody from outside of the pool, or do you have to start as a freshman and?
If there's capacity in a particular school in a particular grade, and there is a provision known as a hardship request, and that will be reviewed and given full consideration. So that is it possible? Yes, it is possible.
So you can move after If you don't have to be a freshman and go through 4 years, you can move in.
If space is available.
Okay.
And they can be a completer.
Well, and specifically with, a good point, specifically with Spring Hill High School, you would have to be a completer in that, meaning that you, not only are you completing your requirements for your high school graduation, but also the certification program or the school that you would choose or opt to be a part of at Spring Hill. You've got to complete that dual track in order to, that's what we mean by completer there. So if you come in as a junior or maybe even a senior, you may not have that opportunity. Whereas if you came in as a sophomore, then there's an opportunity for you to complete that. But Spring Hill pretty much has that option available to it.
Ms. Hammond?
On the page where it says special education students, and it said, under that, students who move during the school year, there are two options. Transfer the student immediately to a school within the new attendance area, or transfer the student at the end of the semester. Would that mean if a family moved, and then the first semester was ended in December, then by the next one, they'd have to be in the school of attendance where they've moved to? We don't ever let them stay the whole year. I was thinking that we did.
Well, based on what you just described, that could ultimately end up being the case if they moved at the end of the first semester.
Right, well, this says that they transfer at the end of the semester.
Right.
So, but in my mind, I was thinking, let's say I'm there at the first of the year, and then my parents move during that time. Would that student be allowed to possibly finish the whole year there, or they'd have to go at the end of that first semester?
And
The way I read it, I think that, but I might be wrong.
That is the way you read it. That student would remain, or either transfer to the new school upon moving, or they would stay until the end of that first semester.
Okay, so they could finish the year.
Question?
Now, again, another thing that you can consider is, as I go back to the hardship request, that is a possibility as well, that there may be a
They
request.
go through your office.
That would be, right. And that starts that process all over.
Questions, discussion? Okay, seeing none, that takes us to item number 16. Excuse me, let's back up just a little bit, we gotta have a vote. We have a motion and a second discussion. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously. That'll take us to item number 16, which is to adjourn. Do I have a motion? Mr. White?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
We have a second. Ms. Hammond seconds. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you all for being here.